talk through a couple of, because there's a couple of big talking points around the game, as well as obviously to do with the performance. The first one being Arteta's decision to drop Aaron Ramsdale for David Raya, and kind of some of the comments he made around last season contemplating swapping the goalie out mid-game to try and affect a change in the performance. First of all, what's your take on the Ramsdale for Raya swap? And do you now think Raya will be your number one? And then, what's also your opinion on some of the comments? Because I found them a bit weird, the Arteta ones, to be honest, around the swapping goalie mid-game. Kind of makes it seem, or he's hinting that he was kind of unhappy with maybe some of Ramsdale's performances last season, but didn't have the balls to maybe make the decision. Or how did you take it?
So, I mean, first of all, I think his comments obviously are going to come across as weird because it's well known in football today that that's not something you do with goalkeepers, right? You can do it with any other position on the pitch. You can't do that with goalkeepers unless it's coming up to a penalty shootout, right? That's the only time we've ever really seen goalkeepers get subbed off when it's not an injury. So obviously from that perspective, you're talking about what we're going to call a very traditional league, right? We've had this discussion about some of the new rules they're bringing in. No one in this league likes change, right? And so when you get, again, a manager who is kind of perceived by the media to be like a mini Pep in the fact that he's trying to do a lot of these tinkery type changes that Pep has become known for over the last however many years. Obviously, it's going to come across to the media and to influencers as being really, really weird. And I mean, I was watching, a well-known podcast earlier ran by a goalkeeper or a former professional goalkeeper. And they were talking about, oh, they hate it. It's horrible to see, it's terrible for confidence. It's terrible for this. It's terrible for that. And I feel like we're all kind of overdoing it a little bit. And I think it's firstly because of the fact that Ramsdale is an English goalkeeper, and because for the most part, even our opposition fans don't hate him. Obviously Tottenham fans do, and they gave him a swift kicking last season. But for the most part, people like him. He's like a decent guy. He's been pretty candid about how when he came to the club, everyone was kind of being a bit harsh to him and so on and so forth. So that doesn't add to the fact that it doesn't make it easier to swallow what Arteta's trying to do. Had he done that with like Matt Turner and Raya, no one would care. They'd be like, it's a bit weird, but yeah, kind of do what you got to do. But the fact that it's Aaron Ramsdale, he's kind of been like that underdog story where we bought him from a team that was terrible. Everyone expected him to be terrible, and he came in and kind of worked his way into it and got a lot of the fans and a lot of the pundits on his side. So because of that, it's to the point now where most people probably agree that he should be England's number one. So all of that stuff makes it a lot more difficult to swallow, and it just highlights or gives a lot of these pundits and journalists a lot more kind of motivation to talk about it and to say it's weird and to kind of essentially just condemn the idea of it in general. And so I think for me, the jury's out. I don't mind the idea of playing two different goalkeepers every now and then. I do disagree with the idea of changing goalkeepers in the middle of a match, just because I think it's like hooking someone after you've put them on as a sub. It's kind of like that Abui type thing where you bring him on in the 23rd minute and take him off in the 45th. It's horrible for morale. But I don't disagree with the fact that you can start Raya when you feel like it fits the game better. As much as we want to say like Raya and Ramsdale are similar players, they're not exactly the same. I think Ramsdale's quite clearly, in my mind, a slightly different kind of goalkeeper. First of all, in his stature. Second of all, in the type of distribution that he has, in terms of what he's got in his locker when it comes to distribution. I think he's really good with his arms, pretty good at kicking out of his hands. But I feel like Raya offers something different in terms of dribbling, in terms of being able to push up the pitch a little bit, that confidence, kicking the ball straight off the ground. I like that part of him. So from that point of view, I'm happy to see, Raya come in when Arteta believes it's suitable for the style that we want to play or the formation that we want to play. So from that point of view, I'm not too bothered. Now, in terms of Ramsdale and how I feel about him, I do think it's going to be a kick in the face or a kick in the teeth for him. Not because of what Arteta's done, but because of what the media are saying about it now, right? And we've seen the media makes things 10 times worse. They amplify all of the negative effects of some of these kinds of things, to the point where I think he's probably going to be reading some of that and think, oh crap, I've lost my place now. Where maybe Arteta's already told him, actually, this is how things are going to be. You're going to play these games and not play these games, that kind of stuff. So I think it will actually hurt Ramsdale in the long term. And I think it's going to be the making or breaking of him. If he can deal with this properly and not let his performances drop, I think we're all good. If you start to see some clangers, because he does have a bozo gene in him every now and then, I do think it could be the end of Ramsdale, and it could be just Raya's going to come in and be our number one. So I think the jury's out. It's out for now, but it's all going to depend on Ramsdale's mental and how he can deal with not being number one goalkeeper for every single match. So that's kind of how I see it. Long-winded response. Yeah.
No. I get you, man. I think it's very diplomatic response of you. But I agree with the sentiment. But I just think, like, ultimately, Arsenal are going to be the winner, right? So if Ramsdale bounces back and gets his place back, that would surely signify that his levels have gone up and the competition has worked, and he's proven to be a better goalie than David Raya. If Raya keeps him out now and performs at a high enough level, and stylistically it makes more sense for Arteta going forward, then Arsenal also win. So in terms of Arsenal, I think this is a lose-lose, because I don't believe the hype in that this can cause major instability and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it could cause one of them to get pissed off, sure, and maybe asked to leave, sure. And sure, it might hurt the England national team because you wouldn't have a second goalie behind Pickford who's playing for one of the big 6 teams in Champions League and all that kind of stuff. And it might be slightly harsh and upset one of the 2 goalies. But this was always going to be the scenario. This was inevitable as soon as you signed Raya. This was always going to happen. There's no way Arteta can keep them both happy, because they both want to be number ones and play all the games. So there was either going to have to be a compromise, or one of them was going to lose out. And I think, like you said, our great British media obviously going to prefer Ramsdale wins the battle and then, carries on to be the number one, and Raya proves to be the number 2, or ends up, leaving at the end of the loan at the end of the season. But this is not that's not the reality. I understand what you're saying. The only slight disagreements I think I'll have with you is around innovation around football. You're right. Like, we don't like change, but there's some things that have been tested before. We've seen other managers try to have goalies for different cups and spread the kind of the load across a couple of goalies, and pretty much it's never worked. And I think there's too much proof and evidence that it wouldn't work to do it that way. And goalies are like a very unique, strange crop of people, and the position is very unique. So I think there's reasons why it hasn't worked before. There's reasons why, like you said, and I agree with you, pulling a goalie in the middle of a match would be bonkers. Not only for the goalie who's coming off, losing confidence, but also the goalie coming on. Because you put him in the thick of it, he's not warm. He hasn't caught his eye. He hasn't got his eye in. You're kind of weakening yourself in that position. So I think some of the comments are weird. I think he's just trying to justify his decision, which is fair enough. My manager's been talking up his ass recently, so I'm not one to point fingers when I can point them back at myself. But it's just an inevitable situation. He's going to piss off one side, and I think I do agree with some people who've said this is probably the plan all along, to find a time to bring Raya in, and he's the real guy that he wants to be number one. Because stylistically, I can see that.
But here's my response to that, and here's maybe a silver lining for Ramsdale is he didn't have a clanger and then get switched out. I feel like that would be different. If he had a bunch of clangers, like some De Gea type, he did something wrong, and then he got switched out, I can see him thinking, okay, I've lost my spot now because I'm obviously not good enough. And that's where I feel like there's maybe a silver lining for him, that it's a stylistic thing and it's not necessarily a choice based off of him not being good enough. You know what I mean? Because the game before this against Man United, he didn't have a clanger. He was actually pretty decent for the most part, right? And so from that point of view, I can kind of see maybe that keeps him feeling a little bit better that maybe he's going to get back in, because it might just be a stylistic choice. And so from that perspective, I feel like that gives me a little bit more maybe confidence also that he's not, because I don't want to see the end of Ramsdale. I'll be honest with you. I also have some bias that he did really well for us last season, and I want to be able to see him in the team. I've watched all these documentaries now with him in them, and he seems like a really level-headed, kind of down-to-earth guy, and he's got a bit about him that makes him what I want to see in a goalkeeper for Arsenal, gives us a bit more kind of grittiness. So I think from that perspective, I think he can look at it and think, okay, maybe it is just a stylistic choice, and I will get my chances to get back in certain other games. So I don't know what's been discussed between the two of them. I do think, obviously, the idea of having multiple goalkeepers to this day has not really worked, right? Obviously, as you said, we've had quite a lot of evidence to say it hasn't worked. At the same time, a lot of the things that Pep did, we've seen a lot of evidence that they shouldn't work or haven't worked when other managers have tried them. So I've still got a little bit of hope that maybe Arteta's got, he's just got the sauce. He's got the Pep sauce where he can make something work that hasn't worked for anyone else. But as you said, he does have a lot of these weird shouts that I disagree with. So it could as easily work out as it could go absolutely tits up. And we could see the back of Ramsdale, which I would hate to see, because I would imagine he's probably going to go to another English club, which means he's going to go to a club that probably competes with us. So I'm praying that it's just, that Arteta is going to be a genius in this case and not be an absolute end. But I guess we'll have to wait a few more weeks to see.
Up, Johns. There's no up. This is my point. Like, it is sure it would go left if you're a big Ramsdale fan, or it would definitely go left if you're a big Raya fan. Either way, one of the two sides is going to be upset. But as a club, it won't go wrong. Because if Ramsdale gets back, continues to be your number one, or now Raya continues to be your number one, it will be because they've been performing at a high level. Because they're both very good goalies. So Arsenal wins out regardless. One of the players will be the loser. And I really doubt either one of them is going to accept the 50-50 role. They're both too good to be. They've been playing Premier League football as number ones for the last couple of seasons. They've been performing at a high level, both of them, and I just can't see long term how it's going to work. So, some fans will be upset. You might have some embarrassing moments where Arteta talks rubbish when he tries to justify it, but it's fine because basically it's a lose-lose. It's a win-win. There's no way you can lose with these two goalies. They're both good. It's not like you're choosing between two different shades of shit. You're choosing between two very good goalies.
But there's the only way that we can lose though is if this unsettles the rest of the team. You see, this is what I'm saying. In terms of the quality of the goalies, of course, it's a win-win because they're both really, really good goalkeepers. So regardless of the competition aspect will make one of them better than the other, right? Quite clearly, one will stand out over the other. That's how things tend to go. But at the same time, if we've got all this attention on it, if we've got people questioning Arteta, if it doesn't work out, let's say, for example, he brings Raya in, Raya goes baps up, and Ramsdale comes back in. If Raya's gone baps up, it's probably resulted in us losing a game or in us drawing a game. So I think in the short term, there are ways that it can negatively affect the team in terms of morale, but also in terms of performances, right? Because the lack of stability in that position we've seen doesn't help anyone, right? Like whenever you've got in the defensive part of a team, if you don't have stability in who you're playing, and this is about Man United as well, if you don't have stability in who you're playing in that back sit or that back four, right, and back, obviously the goalkeeper too, it does create implications for the rest of the team, and it creates implications for the results of the team too. So he's doing a lot of tinkering, which has actually hurt us so far this season. We haven't played very well, and I would argue a lot of the tinkering is down to, a lot of the bad results are down to some of the tinkering that he's done. So if he's going to go and tinker a lot with the goalkeeping position, it could hurt our results. If he chooses the wrong one at the wrong time, it's going to make us look stupid in the media. It's going to make him look stupid in the media. It's going to create some fan discourse, right? Because he's not doing normal things. So everyone's going to look at this weird thing that he's done as being the reason why everything's going badly for us, if it does. And then obviously the results of the team might suffer because we don't have the stability in the position. So I do think it can go wrong. And this is where people like Ben Foster, I get what they're talking about. It can go wrong. And that's where I'm worried.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I of course, there's always a worst case scenario, but I really think you're talking about a 1% chance of that kind of stuff because they're both top goalies. I think you talked about the character of Ramsdale. We don't really know Raya's character necessarily. I haven't really seen too much about him, but Ramsdale doesn't seem like the type of character to throw his toys out the pram. So even if he does become unsettled and may want to leave, I think that'll be all it is. And I don't think it will necessarily become this huge thing that you're talking about. And I think stylistically as well, the difference between Ramsdale to Raya is not the same as a De Gea to Onana. Like,
oh, of course, those are like
so
polar
your
opposites.
team transitions, your team transitions shouldn't really be massively affected by it. And to be honest, you didn't really see that in the game against Everton. It didn't look outwardly obvious that you had a new goalie who played a wildly different style. Sure, there's some attributes. He's a bit higher up the pitch. Like you described, he's kind of takes a bit more time on the ball. He feels a little bit more comfortable on the ball to dribble out and play kind of shorter, intricate passes. But Ramsdale's not poor at any of those things. So I feel like your team will be able to cope with it. And I think it's going to be a positive regardless. But like I said, there might be some memeable moments. There might be some things where people who are fans of Ramsdale or Raya will get their nose bent out of shape. But yeah, it's interesting. Do you now think, just to close this question quickly, do you think Raya is now your number one? Do you think this is like the baton being handed, or do you still think it's up in the air?
No, I don't think it is. I think if it were a different manager, a different team, then I could say yes. So, for example, if it was like Roy Hodgson and he was changing from Johnston to somebody else, I'd be like, yeah, he's done now. Johnston, sit on the bench for a while. Knowing Arteta and what he's been doing so far this season and what kind of breed he comes from, no, I don't think either of them are number one, which is what's strange about it. I would say I'd probably still favour Ramsdale to be the number one for the team. But I guess we'll kind of find out tomorrow. Or I guess for those listeners today.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Because I do lean on the side now that I think you're right. Ramsdale hasn't thrown in a clanger to warrant necessarily being dropped. But I do think Raya coming in will lead towards him being the number one now. And I do think Arteta got him in with the view for him to be the number one eventually. But like an open-ended question to Ramsdale. This is the plan, but you have an opportunity to obviously keep the shirt if you play the way we want you to, and you improve, or you fight for the jersey and get it back. But I do think we're leaning towards that way, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Raya in goal in the Champions League and in goal in the North London derby. I really wouldn't be shocked. I actually think that's where I'm leaning.
I don't think he would have waited this long to do that, though. I feel like from the get-go, he played Havertz, he played Partey in a right-back position. He already took risks. So if he was going to do that with the goalkeeper, I think he would have done it already. So that's why I think there's still a chance for Ramsdale, and I think he's still going to get in.
Yeah, no, I see the logic in it, but I just think Raya came in later in the window. I think there's other things that may have kind of required him to have a little bit more of a like kind of bedding in period. And who knows? There was some chat around. I'm not saying Ramsdale had a bad game in the United game, because I do think he was decent. But there were some people saying he could have saved the Rashford goal. There were some people that were saying that, maybe that's something that you could look at. But I think it would be a stretch. But I do think, anyway, that's just my opinion. I think, and it's not a bad thing, because I rate Raya. I think he's a good goalie. And I think
also, bear in mind, Ramsdale's coming off an international duty where he played. He actually started for us, right? So that could also play into things as well. So we really don't know. It's very early to call.
We'll
but I see why you might say that, because Raya had a good game and he was very commanding of his box in a way that Ramsdale hasn't been before. So I can see it. It could happen. I just still think that Ramsdale's got enough credit in the bank to stay on for a little bit longer.
You would hope so.